On November 12, 1944, an entire German battle group, 2,300 soldiers, marched into the Courland forests of Latvia and never marched out. No bodies, no evidence of battle, no mass graves. When Soviet scouts reached the coordinates 3 days later, they found abandoned weapons, half-eaten rations still warm, and boot prints leading into the swamp. Then nothing. The tracks just stopped. The Wehrmacht didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They vanished. For 60 years, Soviet military records classified the incident as enemy unit destroyed, marshland engagement. But there was no engagement. There was no battle. There was only silence and a mystery that would haunt both sides for generations. Colonel Dmitry Lebedev stood at the forest edge with a map that made no sense. His reconnaissance unit had been tracking the German 389th Infantry Division for 6 days. The Germans were trapped. The Baltic Sea behind them, Soviet forces ahead, nowhere to run. Standard encirclement, standard endgame. Except the Germans weren't there anymore. They were here yesterday, his tracker said, pointing at foxholes still lined with fresh pine branches. Cook fires from this morning. Then they left everything and walked into the marsh. Lebedev looked at the swamp. The Courland wetlands weren't just dangerous, they were a death sentence. Locals called it Velna Pervi, Devil's Bog. Even in winter, the ground could swallow a man whole. 3 meters of frozen peat, over 20 meters of liquid mud and decomposing vegetation. No one crossed it, especially not 2,300 fully equipped soldiers. But someone had tried. Lebedev picked up a German helmet from the ground. Inside, written in pencil, Mutter, Vergib mir, Mother forgive me. The metal was still warm. 2 months earlier, General Major Klaus Wolff received the order that every Wehrmacht officer dreaded: hold at all costs, no retreat authorized. His division was dug into the Courland pocket, a shrinking German-held territory on the Latvian coast. Hitler had declared it a fortress. In reality, it was a graveyard in slow motion. Wolff was 51, a career officer who'd survived Stalingrad and Kursk by knowing when orders were suicide, and this one was textbook suicide. By October 1944, over 200,000 German troops were trapped in Courland. Army Group North, cut off from the rest of the Eastern Front, holding a strip of Latvian coastline for no strategic reason except Hitler's obsession with never yielding ground. The Soviets didn't even need to attack aggressively, they just tightened the noose. Food shipments slowed, ammunition dwindled, wounded men died waiting for evacuations that never came. Wolff's division had been at full strength in August, 3,400 men. By November, he had 2,300, not from combat, from starvation, disease, and despair. He watched his men grow hollow-eyed, not from battle, from the waiting, from knowing that Berlin had forgotten them. Then on November 8th, a Latvian forest guide named Janis Kalnins approached Wolff's command post under a white flag. "There's a way out," Kalnins said. "Through the marsh." Wolff almost had him shot. Desertion was punishable by immediate execution. But Kalnins wasn't a soldier. He was a 58-year-old hunter who'd spent 40 years navigating the wetlands his grandfather had taught him to read like a book. "The Soviets think the marsh is impassable," Kalnins said, spreading a hand-drawn map on Wolff's table. "They're right. For 9 months of the year, it is. But we're in the window. 2 weeks in November. The surface freezes just enough. Not solid ice, a crust, like walking on glass. But if you know the paths, if you know where the old peat ridges are buried, you can cross." Wolff studied the map. 15 kilometers through the wetlands. It would take them behind Soviet lines to a forested area where they could regroup and potentially break through to German-held territory near Lipaja. "How many men have you led across?" Wolf asked. "Alone?" "Dozens, but never an army." "This isn't an army anymore. It's survivors looking for a way home." Kalnin's met his eyes. "Then I'll show you the way. But you need to understand something, General Major. The marsh isn't just dangerous. It's alive. It takes men. Good men, strong men, and it doesn't give them back. If your soldiers panic, if they break formation, if they stop to rest, the bog will swallow them. I've seen it happen in seconds." Wolf looked out at his men, digging foxholes in frozen mud, preparing for a battle they couldn't win. "We're already being swallowed here. At least in the marsh, we'll be moving." He made the call. On November 10th, Wolf gathered his battalion commanders in a bunker that smelled like mold and blood. He told them the plan. They would march in single file at night, following Kalnin's through the frozen marsh. No lights, no talking, no stopping. If a man fell through the ice, he was to be left behind. No exceptions. Major Ernst Becker, a 44-year-old officer from Munich, stood up. "Sir, this is madness. We're trained soldiers, not swamp rats. Half these men have never even seen a wetland. You're asking them to cross 15 kilometers of frozen hell in the dark, in single file, following a Latvian hunter we just met. Do you understand the casualty rate we're looking at? Do you understand the casualty rate if we stay?" Wolf shot back. "0 survivors. The Soviets will overrun this position in 2 weeks, maybe less. Our supply lines are cut. Berlin isn't sending help. This pocket isn't a fortress. It's a coffin. We either walk out now, or we die here slowly." Silence. Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann, a 29-year-old infantry officer from Berlin, spoke quietly. "If we're doing this, we need to do it right. No wounded who can't walk, no equipment we can't carry. We move fast, we move silent, and we don't look back." Becker sat down. "God help us." Wolf looked at each man in the bunker. "God's been absent from the Eastern Front for 3 years. We're helping ourselves." That night, Hartmann wrote in his journal, "We are either walking to freedom or walking to our graves. I don't know which frightens me more, dying here or discovering what comes next. I keep thinking about my daughter Anna. She's 4 now. She won't remember me if I don't make it home. But if I die trying to get home, at least she'll know I tried. That has to mean something." On November 11th, the selection began. Only soldiers who could march were going. The wounded who couldn't walk were given a choice: stay behind and surrender to the Soviets, or receive a mercy bullet from their commanding officer. 17 men chose the bullet. Feldwebel Hans Kruger, a 35-year-old sergeant with shrapnel in his spine, was one of them. He couldn't feel his legs anymore, couldn't stand without help. He knew what Soviet prisoner of war camps did to wounded Germans. He shook Hartmann's hand. "Tell my wife I made it to the end." "Don't tell her how." Hartmann administered the morphine first, then the bullet. He would do this 4 more times that day. At 2100 hours, the column moved out. 2,300 men, each carrying a rifle, 40 rounds of ammunition, 1 day's rations, and whatever personal items they couldn't bear to leave behind. Letters, photographs, wedding rings. They left their vehicles, too loud. They left their heavy weapons, too slow. They left their artillery, their medical supplies, their command radios. Everything that connected them to the Wehrmacht, they abandoned in the mud. Kalnins led them into the forest. Behind them, the campfires still burned. To any Soviet observer, the position looked occupied. By dawn, It would be a ghost town. For the first hour, the ground was solid. Frozen mud, pine needles. The men moved quietly, almost mechanically, the only sound the crunch of boots on frost. Some men prayed. Some men cried silently. Most men just walked. Then Kalnins raised his hand. The forest ended. The marsh began. It didn't look like water. It looked like land. Dark, matted vegetation, stretching into blackness under a moonless sky. But the smell gave it away. Rotting peat. Methane. The smell of things decomposing beneath the surface. Private Otto Klein, a 22-year-old farm boy from Brandenburg, stepped too far left to get a better look. The ground gave way beneath him, like a trapdoor. He sank to his waist in freezing mud before two men grabbed his arms and hauled him back. His legs were black with slime, already going numb from cold. Kalnins didn't turn around. Stay in line. Step where I step. Don't test the ground. The marsh will lie to you. What looks solid might be a death trap. What looks like water might hold your weight. Trust nothing but my footsteps. The column stretched into the darkness. 2,300 men walking in perfect single file, each soldier's eyes locked on the boots of the man ahead. Boot prints in the frost, the only evidence they existed. But the marsh wasn't empty. 3 hours in, the temperature dropped. The thin ice layer that had been holding them began to crack. Not loudly, just small sounds, like glass breaking underwater. Men started breaking through, first their boots, then their knees, then their chests. The soldiers behind them would pull them out, or try to. Corporal Ludwig Meyer went through up to his neck. It took 4 men to pull him free. When they did, his skin was grey, his lips blue. Hypothermia was setting in. Hartmann knew the signs. Meyer would be dead in an hour if they didn't warm him up. But there was no warming up. There was only forward. "Can you walk?" Hartmann whispered. Meyer nodded, teeth chattering so hard Hartmann could hear them clicking. "Then walk." Meyer walked. For another hour. Then he stopped, stood perfectly still, and fell sideways into the darkness. The marsh caught him with a soft splash. By the time anyone reached him, he was gone. Not even bubbles. No one screamed. Screaming meant stopping.
Stopping meant dying.
Hartmann later wrote, "I heard a man go under ahead of me. A soft splash, like someone dropping a stone in a pond. Then silence. We stepped around the hole and kept walking. I don't know his name. I don't know if he was married. I don't know anything about him except the sound he made when the marsh took him. That sound will follow me forever." By midnight, they'd lost 40 men to the swamp. By 200, they'd lost 80. Kalnins kept moving. He didn't slow down, didn't look back. He'd warned them. The marsh had a rhythm. Miss it, and it would take you. Then the fog rolled in. Fog in the Courland marshes isn't like normal fog. It rises from the ground itself, thick and chemical-smelling, like the earth is exhaling poison. Visibility dropped to 2 meters. Men couldn't see the soldier in front of them. They navigated by sound, the crunch of boots on frost, the whisper of breath, the occasional crack of ice. Somewhere in the middle of the column, someone panicked. A young conscript named Dieter Vogel, just 17, broke formation and ran. Maybe he thought he saw solid ground. Maybe he thought he saw lights. It didn't matter. He lasted 4 steps before the ground opened and swallowed him whole. His rifle fell flat on the surface, spinning slowly, then sank. His scream was cut off mid-breath. The column stopped. Men stood frozen, listening. Nothing. Just the fog and the darkness and the sound of their own hearts. Kalnins walked back through the line. If you run, you die. If you stop, you die. The marsh doesn't care about your fear. It only cares about your weight and your movement. The only way out is forward. There is no other choice. Major Becker stared into the fog. How do you know we're not walking in circles? How do you know where we are? Cowlins pointed at the sky. Through gaps in the fog, stars were visible. The sky doesn't lie. The ground does. I've been watching the stars since we left. We're exactly where we need to be. And where is that? Halfway. The men looked at each other. Halfway. They'd lost 80 men, and they were only halfway. They moved forward. At 0400 hours, Cowlins raised his hand. The columns stopped. Ahead, through the fog, voices. Russian voices. Soviet patrol. Wolf crawled forward beside Cowlins. 50 meters ahead, a small Soviet reconnaissance unit, maybe 8 men, was camped on a dry rise, warming themselves by a fire. They were cooking something. The smell of potatoes and onions drifted through the fog. They had no idea 2,300 German soldiers were standing in the darkness just meters away. Wolf signaled. Silence. Wait. For 20 minutes, the entire German column stood frozen in the marsh, water up to their ankles, some men chest deep, watching the Soviets smoke cigarettes and laugh. One Soviet soldier told a joke. His comrades roared with laughter. The sound echoed across the wetlands. If one German man coughed, if one rifle clicked, if one boot squelched too loud, it was over. Private Klein felt something moving against his leg underwater, something alive, a water rat maybe, or a snake. He gritted his teeth and didn't move. The thing brushed against him again, then swam away. The Soviets finished their coffee, stabbed out the fire, shouldered their rifles, and moved west, directly toward the abandoned German positions. The Germans exhaled. Cowlins waved them forward. But as they moved, Hartmann noticed something. The Soviet campfire had been built on solid ground, a small island in the marsh, and on that island, dried wood, shelter, warmth. They walked past it without stopping, because stopping meant dying. At 0530, as dawn began to gray the eastern sky, disaster struck. The lead section of the column, about 200 men following directly behind Cowlins, reached a section where the ice was thinner. They'd been walking for 8 hours. Exhaustion was setting in. Men weren't lifting their feet high enough. They were dragging their boots. And the marsh noticed. The ice gave way not slowly, but all at once, a crack like thunder, and suddenly 50 men were chest-deep in freezing water. The men behind them tried to help, but the ice kept breaking, spreading like a spider web. Cowlins shouted, "Back! Everyone back!" But panic had set in. Men were thrashing, trying to swim, which only made them sink faster. The more they struggled, the deeper they went. Sergeant Paul Richter, a 38-year-old from Hamburg, stopped struggling. He'd served in the Navy before the war. He knew about water, knew about drowning. He spread his arms wide, making himself as flat as possible, and called out calmly, "Stop moving. Spread your weight. Float." Some men listened. They went still, and the marsh held them on the surface. Other men kept panicking. They went under. Cowlins threw ropes. The men who'd gone still were pulled out. The men who'd panicked were gone. In 3 minutes, they lost 32 men. Cowlins found a new path. They moved forward.
By 0700, they'd crossed 12 kilometers. The marsh began to thin. Solid ground appeared in patches. Trees returned. Real trees, with roots that went down into earth instead of water. The men wanted to collapse. Wolf wouldn't let them. "We're still behind enemy lines," he whispered. "We rest when we reach the forests." Not before. But Hartmann noticed something strange. The column was shorter. When they'd started, there were 2,300 men. Now, he estimated maybe 1,800. Over 500 men had vanished into the marsh without a sound. No one talked about it. Talking meant acknowledging it. Acknowledging it meant accepting that over 500 brothers, sons, fathers, and husbands were still in the marsh. Not dead exactly, just gone. They reached the eastern forest edge at 0800 hours. Kalnin stopped and pointed north. Follow the ridge line. Stay in the trees. Avoid open ground. In 2 days you'll reach German lines near Liepaja. After that, you're on your own. Wolf offered him money. German marks. Worthless, but still something. Kalnins refused. Why did you help us? Wolf asked. We're not your people. This isn't your war. Kalnins looked back at the marsh. My son died in the Soviet deportations in 1941. The Russians took him because he spoke German, because his mother was from Berlin. They said he was a collaborator. He was 12. So no, this isn't my war. But when I see men trying to get home to their families, I remember my son trying to come home. And I help. That's all. He turned and walked back into the marsh. The column disappeared into the woods. 3 days later, Colonel Lebedev finally pieced it together. His scouts found the entry point where the Germans had entered the marsh. They found the boot prints, thousands of them, leading into the wetlands in perfect single file. They found abandoned equipment at the forest edge, helmets, backpacks, even a few rifles. And they found Janis Kalnins. The interrogation lasted 2 hours. Kalnins told them everything, the route, the timing, the number of men. He didn't resist, didn't lie. When asked why he helped the Germans, he gave the same answer he'd given Wolf. Lebedev looked at the marsh. How many made it across? I don't know. Maybe half. Maybe less. Show us the route, Kalnins shook his head. I showed them in November. The ice was holding. Now it's December. The temperatures are rising. The crust is breaking. If you go in now, you'll die. Lebedev sent a patrol anyway. 6 men. 3 Soviet scouts and 3 Latvian guides. They entered the marsh at dawn, following the German boot prints. 2 came back. They reported finding German equipment scattered across the wetland. Helmets, rifles, belts, photographs. But no bodies. The swamp took them, one scout said, his eyes hollow. We heard voices. German voices. But we never saw anyone. The fog came in and we heard singing. German soldiers singing. But there was no one there. The other scout refused to speak. He was sent to a psychiatric ward in Riga. He died there 3 months later. The medical report said heart failure. The orderlies said he'd stopped sleeping. Said he kept talking about men made of fog. Soviet command filed a report. Enemy unit destroyed in marshland. Estimated 2,300 casualties. But that wasn't true. On November 19th, a ragged column of German soldiers emerged from the forests near Liepaja. There were 1,127 of them. Exhausted, frostbitten, half-starved. Some were missing fingers from frostbite. Others couldn't speak anymore, their voices lost to the cold. But they were alive. General Major Klaus Wolf reported to Wehrmacht command and requested permission to continue fighting. Permission denied. The Courland pocket was collapsing. Evacuations were underway. He was ordered to board a ship to Danzig. Wolf refused. My men crossed a frozen hell to get here. I'm not leaving them. The Wehrmacht didn't ask again. On November 27th, Wolf and his remaining battalion were captured by Soviet forces during the final Courland offensive. He was sent to a labor camp in the Urals. He survived. 11 years of cutting timber in Siberia, surviving on frozen bread and determination. He returned to Germany in 1956, weighing 40 kilograms less than when he'd been captured. He never spoke publicly about the marsh crossing. When journalists asked, he said only, "Some things are better left in the past." But in a letter to Friedrich Hartmann in 1960, he wrote, "We didn't escape the war that night. We escaped something worse, becoming ghosts in a place no one would remember. The men who didn't make it out aren't buried in Courland. They're still there, under the ice, waiting for spring that never comes. Sometimes I dream about them. They're still walking, still following Kalnins through the dark. They don't know the war ended. They don't know we lost. They just keep walking. And I wonder if they're the lucky ones. At least they never had to see what came after. Oberleutnant Friedrich Hartmann survived the war. He was wounded during the retreat from Liepaja, but made it onto one of the last evacuation ships. He returned to Berlin in 1945 to find his home destroyed by Allied bombing. His wife had survived. His daughter Anna was 7. She didn't recognize him. Hartmann spent the rest of his life working as a school teacher in West Berlin. He never spoke about Courland, but every November, on the anniversary of the marsh crossing, he would write in his journal. The entries were always the same. I walked through hell with 2,300 men. Only 1,127 made it out. I don't know if we were saved or if we were spared. I don't know if God was with us or if the devil looked away. I just know that 1,173 men are still in that marsh. And every year, I wonder if they're still walking. If somewhere, in the fog and the darkness, they're still following Kalnins, still believing they're going home. Hartmann died in 1982. At his funeral, Otto Klein, the farm boy who'd nearly fallen through the ice, gave the eulogy. He was 60 years old, a grandfather, a baker in Munich. "Friedrich saved my life twice," Klein said. "Once when he pulled me out of the marsh, and once when he reminded me why we kept walking, because going back meant dying, and going forward meant maybe, just maybe, seeing home again." Klein paused. "I think about those men who didn't make it. I think about them every day, and I hope they found peace. But I don't think they did, because the marsh doesn't give peace, it just takes and takes and takes." Soviet records were declassified in 1991. The report about the destroyed German unit was found in a military archive in Moscow. It had been annotated multiple times over the years. The first annotation was from Colonel Lebedev in 1944. This was not a military action. This was something else. I do not believe all of these men are dead. I believe they are somewhere we cannot follow. The second annotation was from 1967, written by a Soviet general reviewing old files. Patrols continue to report anomalies in the Courland wetlands. German voices, boot prints appearing overnight, equipment found in locations that should be unreachable. Recommend area be declared off-limits for military exercises. The third annotation was from 1989, just before the collapse of the Soviet Union. "The marsh keeps them. We should let them go. The Courland marshes are still there. Latvia regained independence in 1991. The wetlands became a nature preserve. Tourists are warned to stay on marked paths. Most do, but locals still call them Velna Purvi, Devil's Bog. In winter, when the fog rises and the temperature drops, hunters report hearing voices speaking German. Boot prints appear in the frost, thousands of them, in single file, leading into the swamp. In 2003, a group of German veterans, survivors of the Courland pocket, returned to Latvia to place a memorial. They wanted to honor the men who didn't make it home. They hired a guide to take them to the edge of the marsh. The guide was the grandson of Janis Kalnins. He led them to the exact spot where his grandfather had led 2,300 men into the darkness. They placed a stone marker. On it they inscribed, "To the 1,173 who walked into the marsh and never walked out. You are not forgotten. You are not lost. You are still coming home." That night, the temperature dropped to -15. The fog rolled in thick, and according to local reports, the veteran survivors heard singing. German military songs from 1944. When they looked into the marsh, they saw lights moving in the distance. Lanterns, maybe. Or something else. One of the veterans, a man named Werner Schultz, who'd been 19 during the crossing, walked toward the lights. His companions called him back. He didn't listen. He stepped onto the frozen marsh. The ice held. He walked 20 meters, 30. The lights got closer. His friends shouted for him to come back. He turned, smiled, and waved. "They're here," he called out. "They're still here. They've been waiting." Then he kept walking, into the fog, toward the lights. They never saw him again, because in 1944, 2,300 men walked into a place that shouldn't have let them leave. 1,127 made it out. 1,173 didn't. And the ones who didn't make it out? They're still walking, still following Kalnins through the darkness, still believing that just beyond the next ridge, past the next frozen pool, through the next wall of fog, they'll find solid ground. They'll find home. The marsh lies to everyone, but it never lets go.